Terence McFarland, CEO. I don't even know how to say my own name. Let me try that again. Good evening. Hi, I'm Terence McFarland, CEO of LA Stage Alliance. Welcome. I want to start out with thanking Southern California Public Radio for co-hosting, and special thanks to John Cohn and Jenny Smith for hooking us up. They've always been a great partner in this series. We're happy to be kicking off our second round of LA Stage Talks here at KPCC, Southern California Public Radio, at the Crawford Family Forum. Also want to thank Baker's Man Productions, who's helping us with documenting the event and helping us with live stream. And of course, we couldn't be here without our sponsors, so please hold your applause till the end. There are many of them, which makes me very happy. California Arts Council, California Community Foundation, the City of Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs, Database Works, Do Foundation, Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, the James Irvine Foundation, Los Angeles County Supervisors through the LA County Arts Commission, the Ralph M. Parsons Foundation, the Sherry and Les Biller Family Foundation, the Schubert Foundation, and Sony Pictures Entertainment. The LA Stage Talk series is really important to us. It's a way that we feel that we can engage with dialogue in the community in a way that only a service organization can. We know that most theaters or performing arts groups have some sort of talk back, some sort of engagement with the public where they can talk about the work that they're putting on the stage. But what we hope to accomplish with LA Stage Talks is zooming out to 30,000 feet. How can we talk about things that one organization couldn't talk about on their own? Hence, what does professionalism mean in LA theater and theater at large? So we tried to partner and kick off this series with some scholarly research. Last year we had Counting New Beans and the Intrinsic Impact Study. This year partnering with Michael Bateman from Yale, which you'll hear about in a little bit, to kick off the series. But there are many more to come. Please look at our website to learn what's coming up. The next one is Why Do Philanthropists Support Arts in LA? It's co-hosted by Native Voices at the Autry at Autry Museum. Again, we are live streaming. We'll be taking Q&A and from the audience and comments in real time, as well as taking questions on Facebook, live stream chat, Twitter. If you can get into my brain via telepathy, I will take that as well. And the video of the event will be made available online at lastagealliance.com very soon as we can edit it and get it up. But without further ado, I would like to introduce Michael Bateman, who is the managing editor of Yale Theater Management Knowledge Base. And you'll hear a little bit about that. Please welcome Michael.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you again. Thank you so much to Terence and to Doug and Crystal for putting this event together and inviting me here. Thank you to the wonderful panelists who've agreed to dialogue about this with the findings and with all of you. And I'd like to start by just thanking a few people who actually helped me with the survey itself. So all of this scholarly research, scholarly is a very generous term, all of this scholarly research comes from a survey that I did over the course of 3 months. And I would like to thank Alison Gerber and Andrew Meyer, who are PhD students in sociology and marketing at Yale, respectively. I would like to thank Laura Freeburn-Smith at Organizational Performance Group and the entirety of the Yale Theater Management Department for listening to me talk about this for the past 3 months. So I got interested in the idea of studying professionalism through the Yale Theater Management Knowledge Base, of which I'm the managing editor. And the Yale Theater Management Knowledge Base is a database of materials about theater management, practice, interviews, case studies, that is available to arts administration educators around the country. And Charles Dillingham, one of our panelists, is a board member for that organization. So as a project for this database, I was interested in looking at what does professionalism mean in our field? Do we feel the need to call ourselves professionals? What does it mean to be a professional? And should we professionalize? And how would we sort of go about doing that? I did a little bit of research to start off and sort of found that nothing in this vein had been researched in terms of the theater management community. So I'm sort of starting from ground zero a little bit here and adapting some ideas from sociology in general to our field in particular. So to give you a brief outline of what I'll be talking about over the next 35 minutes, I want to sort of impress upon you why I think it's important to study and talk about this, give you a little bit of background on the sociology behind professionalism in general, talk about the methodology of my study, give you an idea of the profile of the sample group. It looks actually very similar to the TCG fiscal survey in a lot of respects, so it'll seem very similar. Talk about my findings when looking at the field as a whole, and then move to talking about my findings for LA specifically. So I did 2 different surveys. Doug Clayton helped me pester all of you to fill out the LA specific one. So we'll do some comparisons between the national group and the LA group. And then finally, I'll summarize my findings. So most of my findings here are correlational in nature, meaning that I'm not going to give you an idea of what I think, where I think the causal arrow goes, but more what things are related, and then we can move on from there and talk about how, in the discussion part of the evening, how these things might be related to each other. So my key findings: manager of larger organizations tend to compensate staff and artists better, focus more on their mission and on their board, and managers of larger organizations also report having more rewarding careers than managers of smaller organizations. The field does not think of itself as serving the public. The audience, yes, but not necessarily the public. Smaller organizations tend to want more guidance than larger organizations do, and this last term, maybe you can all think of a better term for this, and when I define it, you'll know what I mean. When I talk about a managee manager, that is a manager who spends a larger proportion of their time doing administration and organizational leadership, as opposed to spending more of their time on the art of the organization. So that's managee manager is just shorthand for that. And if you can think of a better term, please let me know at the end. So to start off with, why investigate this? Here's my assumption, that professionals make art better. And I'm going to qualify the assumption a little bit than it otherwise would be by improving the environment in which artists create. So to start off with, let me give you a framework of a sociologist who came up with sort of a broad definition of why professionals enhance any kind of organization in the 1980s. So he looked at a bunch of different fields and found that prudent practice, which is sort of the establishment of minimum standards, along with good practice, which is the establishment of an ethical code around, sort of elevated past the level of just basic, practice to how are we really serving people and being ethical about it, to quality control, meaning we have a mechanism to keep minimum standards and ethical codes in place, and continued development, meaning that as our ethics and our minimum standards change, we're able to keep up with that over time. And he posited that that first column, that framework, leads to the other 2 things: public trust and status and autonomy. And this is for a broad range of professions. The way that I think that this relates to theatre management in particular, I think that maybe when we talk about public trust, we mean public trust in our organization, how we get to run that organization without external forces sort of demanding what we do, and maybe even creative trust in what we program, and status and autonomy leading to self-esteem and promises of rewards. Rewards, again, in a non-profit context, I'm interpreting that to mean maybe that means that organizations that give us money trust us to use that money in a responsible way. The same goes for ticket purchases. My second is sort of the history of non-profit regional theatre since the 60s. I think that compensation, education, and associations, service organizations springing up over sort of this timeline has all moved in one way or another to giving institutions and groups of artists the opportunity to become more sophisticated and enhance the art that's on their stage. And finally, just a quote from Rock Shelfer, the executive at the Goodman Theatre, that the arts are essential to the fabric of our society, and the people who create that work, beginning with the artists, deserve the ability to have some kind of middle-class life based on their work, which I think is a pretty humble proposition, but one that we continue to struggle with in the field. So we want to, or rather, I want to make this logical link between the opportunity of a manager, the opportunity of a manager to have a full-time job, thereby spending more of their time sort of not waiting tables or working a second job, which means that they can focus more closely on the management of the organization that they really care about. So my hypothesis is, if in our field we can determine what kinds of attitudes predict more professional behavior, then we can use those predictions to select for more professional leaders, which in turn makes art better. So over the course of the next sort of 30 minutes, as I talk about professionalism and these frameworks and my findings, remember that it always comes back to how we want to make the art better. So a little bit of background. A different sociologist, this time in the 1960s, suggested that there are 9 different parts of a framework that make up a profession. 4 structural and 5 attitudinal. They live on the next slide. And these 4, I started to look at in terms of, do we have them in theater? So, a full-time occupation, yes, some people have this as a full-time occupation. Establishment of a training school, yes, we have those. Professional associations, according to this definition, we don't necessarily have professional associations, we have service organizations, but when sociologists talk about professional associations, they typically mean an organization that is allowed to regulate those minimum standards and the code of ethics, which, again, as a field, we haven't formally adopted. So we also, technically, there are non-profit codes of ethics, but because there's no punishment or reward for signing onto one or not signing onto one, we don't necessarily have a code of ethics that we have to abide by. And these are 5 attitudinal indicators of being a professional. So this first one is using the professional organization as a reference, and I'll talk about those 2 together during the presentation. Belief in self-regulation, and this, to me, doesn't really apply very much to non-profit theaters, because as non-profits, we have to be regulated to some extent by a board of directors. Belief in service to the public, as you saw from one of my first findings, we don't really see very much of this. Autonomy, which is about expertise, and do we believe in our own ability to judge the quality of our work and our peers' ability to judge the quality of our work. And then a sense of calling to the field, and while I didn't ask about this directly on my survey, I did ask a bunch of questions around calling to the field that sort of allow me to give a little bit of an inference as to whether we feel this. And out of all these 9 factors, we can choose which ones we individually want to take or leave as we go through and as we discuss further. So the survey itself. I designed the survey to take about 15 minutes so that a busy manager could still fill it out. And I didn't use the word professional or professionalism at all in the survey because it's a very loaded word, as we all know. I used GuideStar to identify organizations with budgets greater than $200,000 a year who were 501c3s with a performing arts focus. I was able to get contact information for 765 of them, and over the course of 3 months, I received 405 completed surveys, which is a large sample for the whole population. So this will end up being pretty accurate for predicting the behavior of the population. And then I collected the data and I analyzed them. And this is just to give you an idea of what 405 respondents represents. Over 7,000 years of experience in the field, 2,200 years of organizations history, and 5,300 employees working at those organizations. Also, 59% of regional Tony Award-winning theaters, 59% of LORT members, 47% of TCG members. We'll talk more in detail about LA Stage Alliance members. And that leaves us with a margin of error of 3.79%, which means that when I say, for example, 41% of respondents were female, which is true for the sample, that means for the whole population, it's 41% plus or minus 3.79%, which is pretty accurate. It's close to 4. It's pretty close to 4. We could say 4.
That's a lot of significant digits.
And one more thing about statistics is that all of the correlations that I'll give you are significant to a degree of 0.05, which in layman's terms means that if we ran the survey 20 more times, it would come out the same 19 times. And just to give you a few sort of reflections on maybe some shortcomings that you'll see in the survey. One is, who knows whether those 250 or so organizations that didn't respond are completely different from the ones who did. So we have a self-selection bias. People may have a desirability bias and responding in the way that they think is right as opposed to what they actually think. The particular organizations that I wasn't able to get contact information for, it was mostly because they have a web submission form for email instead of me being able to copy and paste it into my contact list. So maybe there's something about those organizations that's different. And of course, being that I wanted as many respondents as possible, the survey had to be sort of strict in its framework, meaning that I got some emails from managers saying, well, my organization doesn't really fit into this framework that you've laid out. And most of them just sort of answered as best they could. And I hope that the survey captures their data in a way that's useful to them. So now onto the sample group itself. And this I'm just going to run through. It's very similar to the TCG group. So most organizations are on the older side, and this is again over $200,000 a year. Most organizations under $3 million a year. And these budget groups, again, these are just the TCG budget groups. There's nothing magical about them. The first one is budget group 1. The last one is budget group 6, as the TCG fiscal survey requests. Most organizations are balanced or running a slight surplus. There was no correlation between surplus and deficit and size of the organization, but those theater managers experiencing a deficit did tend to view the field as more difficult right now, and those theater managers experiencing a surplus do feel more rewarded by their career right now. Additionally, the split between earned and contributed income is 55 earned, 45 contributed, just like the 2011 fiscal survey, and larger organizations tended to have more earned income. Organizations faced a variety of different levels of competition. Most of the organizations at the high end are in urban areas, and most of the organizations further down are in suburban or rural areas. And an interesting correlation I found here was that the more competition there was in an area, the less likely the organization was to have a subscription program. So that might be interesting, particularly in LA. And I asked about a variety of kinds of income sources, and this was the list that I offered. Other income down here at 20% was mostly rentals, theater space rentals, as that information was written in. And I used this to look at diversity of funding sources. So, as you would imagine, older organizations are more likely to have endowments, but there was a variety of factors that correlated to having more income sources. Staff, boards, bigger budgets, not being a founder, and there's that more managing managers had a greater diversity of income sources. Average weekly compensation is fairly low, and I also asked a question about how much the theatre valued artists as a constituent. And there was no relationship whatsoever between how much a manager valued artists and how much they compensated artists. And just to illustrate a little bit further how closely budget size is related to artist compensation, this is budget group 1, and 45% of budget group 1 is offering their artists, this is, I'm sorry, non-staff weekly salary for artists, 45% between $0 and $200 a week. Group 2, moving over to a slightly higher weekly salary. Group 3, moving over slightly more. Group 4, Group 5, and Group 6, with almost 45% making, of the artists working at that theatre making $800 to $1,000 a week. And now on to the juicy bit, the findings. So I'm going to run through the 9 points of indicators of professionalism. First, is theatre management your full-time occupation? And this pie chart over here, this is what I'm talking about in terms of managers. So the average manager spends 71% of their time on administrative issues and 29% of their time on artistic issues, and 90% of the managers surveyed were working full-time at the theatre, but 100% of the theatres had at least one full-time staff member. Just wasn't necessarily the manager. And I have a little career timeline just to give you an idea of what our average field manager looks like. So our average field manager is 50 years old, entered the field at 32, entered the organization that they work at 38, and got the top job at the place they work at 40 and have had that job for 10 years. And 20% of these managers were also involved in founding their organization. So I also did ask a question about salary compared with gender. And as you'll see, the salaries for female managers is lower on average than the salaries for male theatre managers. This, to me, is significant, and it's also important to point out that experience was also closely correlated with salary, and the average male theatre manager has 19 years of experience in the field, and the average female manager has 16 years of experience in the field, the overall average being 18. And 59% of the sample was male and 41% female. And then I asked about employee benefits, just to see how we're doing on that measure. And the average organization offered just over 5 of these kinds of benefits. And other tended to just be the same insurance, but without copay. Oh, and I got one answer of ha ha ha, so I assumed that they didn't give any benefits. Few professional development opportunities available at most of these theatres. I gave quite a short list, and of these, really 4, because none doesn't count, theatres offered an average of under 2. And the other category here mostly represents we don't have a policy, we do ad hoc kinds of things when we can afford to. Do we have training schools? Yes, we do. And younger theatre managers tend to be more formally trained. You can see they spent more of their careers doing theatre management. And I think that this is important to note because of this, that very few managers rather, are actually trained for the career. We only have 10% or so getting, and this is broken down by gender, 10% getting a graduate degree specifically in arts administration, and like 2.5% getting an undergraduate degree in it. And this made me think of a quote that Susie Medak gave in American Theatre Magazine in an article called The Management Puzzle. She said, "Our organizations are much more complicated than they were 20 years ago. So many of us realized that we would no longer hire ourselves to run these organizations." So perhaps it's a good sign that over time we are bringing more young, trained managers to the field. And I'm going to talk about these two together, the professional associations. And while we don't have, as I said, professional associations per se, we do have service organizations that I'm going to use to talk about this section. So this graph looks a little bit different because it was done by my marketing PhD friend, and he's very clever with statistics. So this graph, to me, it explains that smaller organizations really want minimum standards a lot more, 2.5 times more than the largest organizations. And this was an analysis that we did comparing whether people wanted minimum standards with a whole range of factors. And this came out absolutely as the dominant factor. Being a small organization means that you are 2.5 times more likely to want minimum standards of practice. And I asked about how often theatre managers consult with their service organizations that they belong to. They belong to more than 70 organizations that I counted, and 315 of my 400 respondents belong to a service organization. And they ask about all of these issues. And now I'm going to sort of compare that with what they ask their peers about. They consult with their service organizations about once a month. They consult with their peers about once a week. And many more did this. 393 of the 405 consulted with their peers, and more often. So I think this is an interesting representation, I'm gonna use this right here, yeah, of where we consult far more with our peers than with our service organizations, and I'll be very interested to hear about why we think that might be. Now moving on to a code of ethics. We don't really want one. As I said, we can sign on to nonprofit codes of ethics, and I'd just like to give you a little argument that I found on the National Council of Nonprofits website from a professor at Duke, who said, "The greatest threat for the not-for-profit sector is the betrayal of public trust, the disappointment of public confidence. Virtually all knowledgeable observers of the not-for-profit scene believe that an overwhelming proportion of not-for-profits are honorably run. That admirable context, however, does not provide much protection for the sector when a sequence of highly publicized, disgraceful not-for-profit misdeeds occur." So that's kind of, a rationale for adopting a code of ethics, but in general, we're not particularly interested. However, organizations that consult, or theaters that consult with service organizations, the managers at those organizations are much more interested in having a code of ethics than those who never consult. They are almost twice as likely to want a code of ethics. As I said, belief in self-regulation, we don't really have a lot of this, except that maybe 8% other, because those folks are mostly, I am the managing director and the artistic director and the board chair, and I run everything. So aside from those folks, the nonprofit structure seems to make this a difficult one for nonprofits to tackle. Do we believe in service to the public? I really like this quote from Slate Magazine, a recent Slate Magazine article. we don't really need a whole lot. You guys can read this. You don't really need a whole lot to start a non-profit organization. But our boards of directors hold our organizations in trust, ostensibly for the public good. So do we believe in serving that public good? We get charitable gifts, we get tax-deductible donations, and we get tax exemption. So what do we think of the public that gives us these things? It's not a super high priority. 53 out of the 405 respondents listed the public as their #1 most important constituent. And granted, the other constituents here are very important as well. However, I did find it interesting that if we're talking about something like the fiscal cliff, losing our tax-deductible donation, what do we owe the public and what do we think the public owes us in response? Autonomy. This is all about expertise. So as I said, managers spend an average of 71% of their time on administrative matters as opposed to artistic matters. And those who are more managey managers have fewer years in the position, fewer years in the organization, were less likely to be founders, but in general had larger budgets. And so I was interested in getting at the idea of expertise by asking sort of about a thought experiment. So the thought experiment that I set up was Theatre X has a deficit. All of the information about why Theatre X has a deficit is publicly available. So out of this list of constituents, who is most qualified to judge whether the deficit was the managing director's fault? And I gave them some pretty compelling sort of groups to choose from. The board, the finance director of the board, the finance chair of the board, the finance director of the organization, auditors, the artistic director, the audience, their peer managers, and of course, the manager, him or herself. And what I found was that most managers just tend to believe in their own ability to judge their culpability. However, the more experienced a manager was, the more likely they are to trust the judgment of their peer managers. And then finally, the 9th point, sense of calling. So to get at sense of calling, I asked about how long somebody had been in the career, how early they had started, perhaps indicating sense of calling, whether they feel rewarded, and finally, would they recommend the field to others? Are they evangelizing for theatre management? So managers who spent a larger proportion of their career in theatre management do in fact feel more rewarded, joined the field earlier, and wanted to evangelize on behalf of the field more. So now to compare that national data with the LA data. A lot of the data is the same, even though the national data has a floor of budgets of $200,000 a year, and there was no floor for the LA data. So Doug Clayton was very helpful in sending this out and pestering people. We got a great 73 respondents, but out of the population, that makes the margin of error a little bit wider for us. 30 out of the 73 organizations have full-time employees, and that is compared to 100% of the sample nationally. 10% of those 30 organizations employ 82% of the employees. So that also seems to me to skew the data a bit in one direction. And opposed to the national percentage of 20% being founders, in LA it's 48%. And theatre managers in LA tended to have less experience in the field. Nationally, the average was 18 years, and in LA, the average here is 13 years. I also found that artists and the public were more important to LA theatre managers, while the artistic director and the board were less important constituents. being a more managey manager was even more important to feeling like you have a rewarding career. Interestingly, older managers were less likely to recommend the field to younger folks. So that is an interesting dynamic to talk about later. And the more competitive the manager perceives the field to be, the less likely they would want minimum standards or a code of ethics, which to me was a surprising finding. However, overall, they're slightly more likely than the national average to want a code of ethics. So here we go with our levels of surplus and deficit. LA theaters seem to be faring a little bit worse than our national average. The artist compensation in LA is much lower. But again, we find a pretty big disparity between those few large organizations and the many smaller organizations. LA managers spend more time on the art and less time, as I would say, being managey managers. And they do less reporting to the board. So there are more folks who are the doing everything folks. I'm the managing director, I'm the artistic director, and I'm the board chair as well. And then this is maybe particularly interesting to the LA Stage Alliance folks. This is the difference between how we consult with our service organizations on a national level and how LA theaters consult with their service organizations and what they consult about. So LA organizations consult more about marketing and development and less about governance, human resources, and staff hiring. And making a comparison for the peers, they consult, or rather you guys, consult more about marketing, more about artist hiring, less about staff hiring, human resources, and governance, and that's with each other. So, a quick summary, if you take away nothing else. Size is what gets artists paid better, and I think it's a pretty common aspiration to want to pay artists better. Smaller organizations want more guidance than larger organizations. The field does not think of itself particularly as serving the public as distinct from its audience. Managey managers are more satisfied, better compensated, than those who split their focus. And so just to end with a couple of questions for further research. I haven't seen any indication of a study like this being conducted before, so this is very basic level. I think that there are lots of interesting directions for this to go in the future. Why are we consulting more with peers in certain areas? Why are we not interested in minimum standards or a code of ethics? Why do we find ourselves so trustworthy and our peers not so trustworthy, but we still consult with them all the time? What causes our disparities in compensation between the genders? And what expertise can these sort of magical managey managers that feel more rewarded and have larger budgets, what can they bring to us? What sophistication do they have to offer that we can use in our theaters? And that's it. Thank you all very much.
Am I on yet? Here we go, great. And with that, I'm going to ask some of our managing managers to join us. But before I do that, I was reluctant to, I left out a sponsor. Ken Werther Publicity is a very strong sponsor of LA Stage Alliance, so I wanted to thank him especially as well. And I also forgot to say the hashtag. For those of you that are tweeting that haven't yet figured it out, LA Stage Talks is our hashtag. So I'd like to bring our panelists up. Charles Dillingham, who is the past managing director of Center Theater Group and currently a consultant. Elizabeth Doran, who is the executive director of Pasadena Playhouse and the past managing director of The Actors Gang. Debbie Devine, representing the artistic front from 24th Street Theater. And Jenny Byrd, who is the managing director? Executive Director of Brimmer Street Theater Company, and Jose Luis Valenzuela sends his regrets. He's unable to join us. He was going to be the other artistic director, so Debbie's going to hold down the fort on the art front. Please join us. So I'd love to start with your initial reactions to the report. and anybody can dive in.
That was a lot of material to take in so quickly. But I do want to compliment Michael on doing a terrific job, and there is obviously a great deal for all of us to dig in a little bit more than is possible, maybe even tonight. But so congratulations, Michael.
Bravo, bravo.
It's fascinating, and I'm just pleased to see that the field is being studied in this way, being given that credit and attention that can be a foundation for more scholarly research and also just more improvement. I'm glad that we're being reflective in this way, so I'm just excited that this exists. Even more excited that I get to be a part of it in some small way, and that we're, as a community, taking it very seriously, and it's not just gonna sit on the shelf.
I was particularly proud of the fact that LA theaters see the public as an important constituent, because I think that's a really important thing. In theater, we tend to become very earned revenue focused, and our reviews are important to us, and we get lost in the fact that we do art, but we do art to serve our community. And I think it's so interesting that, and I think in LA we are really good at knowing that. So I think it's cool that you figured that out.
And I love that managing manager. Yeah. That's just a great thing to share. Fabulous.
Were there specific points in the report that stood out to you? What were the biggest takeaways?
I was most fascinated about the part about managing managers, that because it seems like it may seem counterintuitive to, like, for me personally, the reason I got into management was because I wanted to make art, and I found out, oh, if I'm going to make art, somebody's got to manage all this. And then somewhere along the line, I found out how much I loved the managing, and I do a lot less of the art now, and that does make me more happy, but I would have thought I would be the exception to the rule. And so it was interesting to see that there is a correlation when people find that they're good at the management, they enjoy the management, they focus on the management, that they're happy to do it. I liked that.
Yeah, I agree. That was a surprise to me, because I had, as I grew further and further away from the rehearsal room, as the institutions that I was working with became bigger, it was always a regret to me. But I do understand why those managing managers are, in a sense, a lot of your statistics shows they are more successful because they are paying attention to that administrative side. But I think most of us went into this field for the same reason that you mentioned, and I think there is a sense of regret that we don't spend maybe almost any time in the rehearsal room, just using the rehearsal room as a metaphor for that.
I was also impressed by the capture of the idea that we talk to our peers a lot, because I definitely do that all the time, and I think we do that in our field particularly a lot. We like to talk to each other about what we're doing, and we are always asking for references about artists and what's going on with that. Also, we also deal with another aspect of our field, which is commercial theater, and people who go into commercial theater may do it for different reasons than people go into nonprofit theater, and so I think we tend to talk to our other nonprofit people frequently, and then sometimes we talk to our commercial people too. But I think it's an interesting distinction. We tend to need, because we blend those worlds sometimes, we need to talk to our other nonprofit theaters about how they've experienced other commercial producers who they've worked with, or we need to talk to each other a lot.
For me, at 24th Street Theater, we're lucky enough in our 15th year to have 5 full-time staff with benefits, 25 part-time staff, and to not have to be in the budget room when they're doing the budget, to be able to run into the theater and do the work that I do. And you were going to ask us how we know we're professional, and I realized from your survey it's because I'm 7,000 years in the field. It was clear to me. But that infrastructure that managing managers give us, or certainly in our organization, give me the freedom to be the artist, and that just it's wonderful to know that that's where we're going. The field is progressing toward that, and that we need more infrastructure. I think that is the correlation to better paying jobs, is absolutely that.
And I just want to say one more thing. Having sat on several grant panels for the city of LA and for the county and Santa Monica and a few more, I figured out why so many 99-seat theater organizations suffer with not being able to hire professional management and suffer from being able to help the artists to live a middle-class lifestyle, and that is space. In LA, we pay for space. Everybody, if they presented budgets through those grant panels, I saw would put these budgets together and they would say, this is how much we pay for space, and therefore we can't pay a full-time staff person, or we can't pay a professionalized manager. And then that makes that theater really struggle to proceed and make money, especially in an economy that tanks. And so in LA particularly, we really pay for our spaces, but yet somehow we have a flourishing 99-seat theater scene where we grab space wherever we can. But it would be wonderful, I think, for us to try at the larger institutions to provide space to 99-seat theaters, or find ways to help smaller theaters succeed under our umbrellas and try to solve that problem so they can spend their money on professionalizing their staff.
I think you've got support from Brimmer Street Theater.
As a nomad theater company, I absolutely would love to come perform at your theater.
Cool.
Great. I'll take all the free space we can get. Half of our budget goes to venue and about 25% to paying people. And I don't think that's the balance that I would prefer to see.
Half of their budget. Wow.
To follow up on Debbie's comments, how do each of you all define professionalism, either personally or professionally, or at the organizations that you work with? How does professionalism come up?
Well, I think it's a good question, because when Michael first contacted me and asked me to join the panel, and all he said was that he'd been doing this research work on professionalism, and I thought to myself, well, that's a word really I hadn't thought about in a long time, and I kind of went back all the way back to the early days of the regional theater movement, and particularly in California. There was a huge fight when the California Arts Council was first established. We had a governor named Brown, I believe, and there was a huge fight in the state between amateur theater companies and professional theater companies about what the standards were going to be in terms of who was going to be eligible to receive funding from what we thought at the time was going to be this mountain of money, or this river of money that was going to come down towards us. And the professional companies formed an organization called the California Theater Council and won that battle, essentially. So at that time, we were really only defining professionalism as being paid. I mean, that was really the only difference we were drawing. And not just that the managers were paid, but that the actors were paid and the staff was paid. But Michael has brought in this whole concept of a code of ethics, or the question of a code of ethics, which puts a whole new layer onto it, which is again something I'd never really thought about. But the other part of being a professional that I thought when Michael mentioned this was something that maybe is related to a code of ethics, although I don't think it could really be addressed by a formal code of ethics, and that is professional behavior. And maybe that can best be described briefly by the negative, because we all kind of know what unprofessional behavior is. Screaming at people, threatening at people, that kind of behavior, and there are standards that we think of as professional, and there is behavior that we think of as non-professional, and those were two thoughts that came through my mind that just those were the only two definitions I had before seeing Michael's material the only two definitions I had of professionalism.
Well, Brimmer Street's a decidedly pro-am kind of theater where some of us are getting paid, some of us are not, some of us are getting paid more than others, some of us are in the union, some of us are not. And so what really, when we say, like, you know, be professional, what we're talking about is having respect for each other, having respect for ourselves and our own work. And also, I think, a level of sophistication, something Michael said that clicked for me. I was like, yeah, when I think of behaving professionally, I'm not thinking about whether or not I'm getting a paycheck for that behavior. I'm thinking about, is it sophisticated? And I think, at least in my world, that has more value for us than whether or not you're unionized. There was a hot topic that came up lately when the Ovation Awards started placing a little bit more of an emphasis on whether you're working with union performers and using union directors and designers. And a lot of folks in my pro-am community felt like their work was being devalued because of this, because if you're not in the union, if you're not getting paid in the same way, are you therefore less professional? I think it comes down to, like you said, behavior, and sophistication is what I cling on to, what I take a pride in professionalism, because as an artistic, or as an executive director, I'm not getting paid, but I'm professional.
I would agree that's also a big part of being in LA. You know, when I ran a theater on the East Coast, in Albany, New York, if you were a professional actor, it was a huge deal, you know, because you lived far from where you could get paid to do that frequently. In LA, you can be a professional actor because you work infrequently, but you do it at a professional level. You know, you don't have to be a member of Actors Equity to also be a member of the other unions out here. And so in the world of theater, you get a big mix of equal talent who may not all have decided to take an equity card because at this point in the economy, they don't want to, you know, pay for that. But you can still see the same level of excellence. Plus, I think that the internet has really leveled the playing field as far as reviews. You know, you can have great Gold Star reviews for a show that you've charged $7 through Gold Star for, and you can put those on your poster, you know. The guy at Gold Star said, and people will look at that online and go, cool, I'll go check out that show, you know. How the audience reacts to us and tells us whether we are professional or not has something to do with it too now, in a different way.
Yeah, that's interesting, that the audience can define whether you're professional or not. And what, I mean, we're, you know, in Michael's survey, it's, does the public trust you? Does it trust you to be, obviously, to be professional? And maybe that sophistication is part of it. But I have to go back, and maybe just because I'm so damn old, I just feel like compensation, making a living wage, is a huge part of how you define yourself a professional. I am, you know, thrilled that I can have this job, and I work full-time, and I'm decidedly middle class, and my car is 12 years old. But I take pride in that the organization has been built to that, and that I define it as being able to not only pay myself, but that that I'm paid, but that the staff is paid, and the staff has health care and professional development, and that we are in a space, and that there is some security, and we do think of ourselves as sophisticated, and that we do serve the public, and there is a calling. I mean, all of those elements exist for me, you know, checking your boxes, Michael, and saying, yes, I am a professional in a professional organization, and yet I feel like there's just so much more to do. And we need the Jennies. We need you to graduate, and we need, you know, so much more infrastructure to make it possible for us to do the art, for you to do what you're doing, and to grow what is some rockin' fabulous work here. But if you're, you know, 8 hours on your feet, and you're working at Starbucks, and you're coming in to rehearse, that's just a really hard sustenance. And how long do you survive, you know? I mean, Terence, you were saying, if you hadn't gotten the staff at LA Stage, where would you be now if you hadn't gotten staff?
Yeah, I certainly would have stepped down. I wouldn't have been able to sustain the energy that
exactly.
I have.
The infrastructure allows us to go on and to build and to grow. So that's my definition.
Like, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I was just to speak to all of these points. I think that's the elegance of this framework is that it doesn't have to be about just compensation anymore. You can sort of open up the definition and allow yourself to consider other aspects of what it means to be a professional. And the idea of bringing in sophistication, in fact, I had great trouble designing the survey in a way where I could say, you know, this is professional behavior, this is professional behavior, because on my end it felt very judgmental. So I ended up leaving that off. But I think that's the next level, is to say, well, are we being sophisticated, and do we have professional behavior? So just to sort of open up that definition of not just, I'm getting paid.
I think I keep talking about LA because I'm pretty fascinated by LA, but I think if we don't do something, given this economy being as bad as it has been since 2008, 2007, if we don't in our field do something to help our artists to professionalize, to continue to grow older and be able to be artists and also take care of their parents and have babies and get married and do those things that they hold off on right now because of this terrible economy, they still try to be artists. They live in smaller and smaller spaces. They find themselves unable to pay for the airfare to go to visit their ailing mother. I mean, this is the stuff that artists are dealing with in LA right now because of this economy. And if we don't, as a field, talk to each other about it and try to find a way to support them, we're really going to be hurting in 5 years' time when we discover most of our artists have had to stop doing what they were doing. And we have to try to find a way to professionalize. And those of us who have been lucky enough to find a career in theater in LA should get together and talk about this more. I think it's great that you're doing this. Good job.
We had 2 different questions from Twitter asking about the relationship between professional and union membership. Can each of you talk about how you interact with the unions and how you grapple with that language? I mean, you brought it up a little bit, Jenny, so maybe we'll start with you.
Well, if union membership makes professionalism, then I'm a professional stage manager, but I haven't stage managed in 10 years. You know, I think that it's an indicator, but I don't know that it can be a definer. Like, I don't know if that box has to be checked, especially in Los Angeles, where I think union membership can be, it can hold people back from doing maybe like the work that they find more satisfying sometimes. So you have to walk that balance between, you know, the intrinsic reward and then the monetary reward. And sometimes the union makes that monetary reward possible, but sometimes it makes the intrinsic reward harder to find, I guess. I think it's complicated. I think it's absolutely different for everybody. I mean, I know for so many people, the day they get their card is like the day that they feel that they've arrived, and the rest of their career does unfold from that moment. And I'm not anti-union in any way. I think it's, you know, a wonderful thing to be able to protect artists. But I also don't think that it's like, you know, if that box isn't checked, then you don't count. I don't believe that at all.
Well, absolutely. You have to agree with that. That's so generous of you. However, though, directing for as long as I've directed, there is a correlation that I've discovered, and maybe it's just my world, that the union carrying card members, there's a different level of quality. There's something that's there. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the confidence that you get from that, experience, training, opportunities. But I find myself casting union members much more often than non-union members.
I think there's also a question of correlation there too, though. Like, the good actors also become members of union. They're not good actors because they're members of the union.
Agreed.
Well, I think that unions provide artists somewhat of the peer relationships that Michael was talking about that theater managers have. That once you are a member of the union and you're working with other people in that union, you tend to aspire to the level of work that those people are doing, and you also have an opportunity to talk to those people and relate to them, and grow your vision of your work, you know, with the interactions with other people who have maybe come into the field before you, etc. And I think that's similar to what happens Michael, you drew a distinction for managers in terms of when do they consult with their peers and when do they consult with their service organizations. But many people consult with their peers through the service organizations. You go to a LORT meeting or a TCG meeting knowing that half of what you're going to be doing is talking to people in the corridors, at lunch, dinner, at the bar at night, etc. You meet people through those service organizations. So I think there's a difference, and you drew it, but I think there's also one in the same. And I think the same thing is probably true with actors and particularly directors. I mean, so that they, once you're in the club, you can take advantage of what a club can give you.
When I was at the Actors Gang, one of my favorite things to do was to write a grant to try to get something out of our 99-seat theater into a realm that equity considered needing an equity contract, so a TYA in the park. And it would all of a sudden get my members of my ensemble the ability to get an equity card, or at least get on an equity contract. So we did a lot of little things to try to be crafty to get equity contracts to our people when we could afford to do it. I think that it is a wonderful thing to join the union. I'm very happy about the unions that we work with at the Playhouse now. And I think you're right. I mean, in New York, if you were needing to sublet, you could go over to the union and find the cork board and, oh, I'm going to go live in this other actor's apartment, and you knew you were both members of the union, so it was trusting, you know, this relationship development. And I think, again, in a tough economy, you need to do more bartering and borrowing and sharing, and the union provides a place for people to do that while they feel really proud about themselves. But I still say we should get craftier and craftier about ways to get people equity contracts.
It's a bar. I mean, you're right about that. There's something to be proud of to be able to have that accomplishment.
One of the things that I was really excited to see in the presentation was the idea of this sort of code of ethics. Sort of the secret piece of that for me was one of our most visited pages on our website is a post that talks about a code of ethics that was written in 1945 by an actress who was a member of an LA theater community, and we're going to post it to our website, and I encourage you to go look at it and comment on it. But it shocks me because every time it sort of bubbles up, someone discovers it and they post it on their Facebook page and it goes viral, and it is the #1 most visited page. So to me, it indicates that people are interested in this topic, and so it was really exciting for you to bring that up, Michael. But I'm wondering, for those of you here on the panel, have you had codes of ethics or code of conducts or specific kind of, I know there are so many membership-based companies in Los Angeles where you've got to kind of self-govern in a really interesting way. I'd love to hear your specific experience with these qualities that we're talking about, how they've come up, maybe Charles from you, from HR, right, and sort of the rules of the rehearsal room, those types of things. If each of you can kind of talk about a few of the points, either things that went well or things that didn't go so well.
Well, as I said, a code of ethics is not. This is the first time in my experience that this phrase and this question has been discussed. So the idea was totally new to me. The one aspect of that I was always extremely serious about with myself and also with the people that I worked with, and that was with expenses. And I always told my people to fill out the expenses report as though it was going to be the subject of a board meeting. And because I said to people, I said, you know, if they ever want to get rid of us, that's where they'll look. And they'll try to find something that doesn't look good. So have a very high standard there. And Michael, you mentioned some of these spectacular incidents of nonprofits, not in the theater, that I'm thinking of, where the CEOs of these organizations, you know, there was a huge publicity and very negative publicity about the whole nonprofit area growing out of. The Getty was one of them. The Smithsonian was another, and there have been a couple of others, and a lot of it was about expense abuse. A lot of it was about expense abuse, and I'm not sure how a code of ethics would address that, but that's a big sinkhole, I think, of bad ethical behavior when it does occur.
There was talk about professional training for arts managers and how this is something that's starting to kind of come into the field more than it existed years ago. I'm in the arts management program at Claremont Graduate University, and in our nonprofit accounting class, we learned about Sarbanes-Oxley for nonprofits and how to avoid having these scandals and how to track your expenses and all that. And as we were doing case studies of other organizations, so many of my classmates were just shocked that, can you believe none of these small organizations are following Sarbanes-Oxley for nonprofits? So many of them haven't even heard of it. And I wasn't shocked because I'm like coming up from the grassroots, I guess, and I didn't know what Sarbanes-Oxley was either when I started, but it's an indication that as these trained managers get into the field, there might be more adherence to these codes because they're being taught it. Because how are you going to know what Sarbanes-Oxley for nonprofit is if no one ever gives you that book? Like, why would you think that that would even exist? So I don't know, that might be something that a tide that changes as more educated managers get into the field.
For us, we're a hybrid. So 24th Street Theater is a social service organization as much as it is an arts organization, a theater organization. And our doors are open. We have, those of you that have been there, we have big green carriage doors. The building was built in 1928 as a carriage house. So the front that faces out to our street, big green carriage doors, and they're open every day, wide open, from noon to 6 every day. And kids come in, and parents come in, and teachers come in, and neighbors come in, and drunks come in. And the code of ethics in our organization, for all of us that are working in the staff, is that if a funder walks in, and we had one today, and Willie, the local alcoholic, staggers in, they're both treated with the same amount of respect. And we honor them in the same way, and we get them both a cup of coffee, and we're excited and happy that they're part of our community. So for us, when you say code of ethics, I think about it in a very different way.
For me, I went and got my MBA in part because I couldn't stand so many code of ethics violations I saw in our theater community in terms of management. I felt like so many times as I was running my own career in arts management, I was bumping up against ideas that seemed really caveman-istic. And that, wow, we should do something about that. I'll go get my MBA and I'll learn how to be a good manager, And also, women of my generation were raised by mothers who, in the 1970s, were very serious about feminism. And so I was hit up with a lot of feminist ethics, that I still get uptight about. So I like to make sure that certain things, particularly about women and people of protected status, are handled carefully. And, we work in a public space. That's one of my favorite things I learned in my MBA, is that if you're a secretary at the front desk and the UPS guy comes in and, pinches your butt, you can sue your company because the UPS guy did that. Because sexual harassment is so serious. It's a public place that it's my job as a manager to create an environment for my assistant that she feels safe because she's in a public place. And she has the rights to certain experiences there. I always feel like every employee and every patron of the arts, they all have rights and responsibilities. So you have to remember that when you're dealing with them. And in our field, it's very typical for someone to walk nude through the office, This is not atypical. And it's typical also to ask your staff to stick around and be a volunteer for 8 more hours because they love the art. And more theaters are getting in trouble with this. And we have to figure out how to at least abide by California state law. At least let's set that standard. And that's a struggle for a lot of theaters, really, because we go through this, it's volunteerism / your job.
Well, and, we are the idea of public good. There's also public safety. And we are a public space. And we do a lot of training with our house staff. We're in earthquake country or fire country. We have things can happen. So for us, that training and being conscious and and careful, not only just about what we say to each other and how we say it, but that the public, we are there for the public good, and that's first and foremost in the work that we do.
And I also think, I'm not sure if it would pass the litmus test as technically a code of ethics, but I feel like this is a good place to mention the 99-seat plan, because it really is kind of dictating how to behave and how to treat people, whether or not they're protected by that plan. It just kind of creates a guideline for those of us in smaller organizations of, reminding people not to rehearse a play for 12 months or 12 hours a day, every day, back to back. Like, just those, it gets into ethics, I think. It's a guideline for how to treat our staff and ourselves.
Great. And with that, I'd love to open it up to all of you and also to our viewers online. If you could wait for the microphone, and once you get it, introduce yourself, and questions or comments. We'll start here.
I have a question, but
Can you introduce
first I
yourself
want to
start?
comment on the statistics that you quote to the 100th of percent. My name is Don Trask. Let me just say that assumes your model of your important parameters of your universe is exactly what the universe is. And the likelihood of that is so small that I would not quote your statistics to 100th of percent. But that doesn't mean it isn't valuable what you do. It's just I would not believe the statistics. But it still tells you what the important directions are. And my question is, in order for what you've done to have more meaning to me, I would like to know how that compares to different types of populations. Like, if I were to have the same type of study, which I know doesn't exist, on, say, carpenters, engineers, doctors, I'd like to see how those statistics compare to what you have to kind of get an idea of how your universe fits in with other people's universes.
Me too. That would be great. And there must be research. There must be research out there. I've only sort of used the aggregated research rather than particular fields. So I've been looking more at models, but.
How do you define good? I mean, I would think you would define good compared to how the actors compare to other people in life. I mean, if 25% of your actors are unsatisfied, and 100% of the plumbers are unsatisfied, that's good, right? But if it's the other way around, it's bad.
Right, yes.
Sure, hopefully we'll be able to sort of look up some other professionalism studies if we can, and certainly we'll post those to the website as we find them. So we'll go here to Jeannie and then to here.
Hey, hi, I'm Jeannie Hackett. I was just thinking about this whole professionalism discussion and thinking about it from the point of view of being a professional actor and the sort of standards that we require of ourselves with the work, a sort of work ethic that I see in most actors, which is, there are certain givens. You're never late. You always, report to the stage manager if there's any problem. You always do your research to the nth degree. I mean, there is no division between if you're working in a 99-seat theater or if you're being paid $2,000 a week. You are doing the exact same amount of work because you can't go on stage without doing that work and do well. And I think that kind of 200% that the artists learn through training and through working with professionals is something that often spreads through the organization in terms of this is what is expected to give. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I think, I wish sometimes as an artist I could say, hey, you know what, I'm not getting paid that much. I'm not going to do that much work. But it just doesn't happen that way. So I really am saying more from the observation. I don't know if any of you have anything to relate to that, but I think the artist professionalism comes first in the organization.
Well, yeah, I was. This ties very closely, I think, to the conversation about ethics, because I think as a union, actors signing on to being in a union is much closer to having a minimum standard and a code of ethics than theatre managers who don't have to do that. There are things that you can do to get kicked below the minimum standard, to get kicked out of the union. where there is no there's no lack of ethics or level of professionalism below which you can sink to get kicked out of being a theatre manager. It's possible that nobody might hire you, but there's no licensure to stop you from doing it.
Hi, I'm Judy Pies, proud member of Equity for lots of decades. So I was thinking about equity companies that are giving their actors contracts versus 99-seat theaters. And the number of those theaters that are paying has shrunk hugely since I first came to Los Angeles in 1977. The amount of 99-seat theaters and the burgeoning of creativity has been huge. But I thought about theaters that no longer exist, such as the Cannon Theater or the Coronet Theater. And I'm thinking of 4 major Los Angeles companies, the Center Theater Group and their theaters, the Geffen, the Pasadena Playhouse, and South Coast Rep, plus a couple other theaters that bravely went from being equity waiver to, or 99-seat theaters to equity companies. The Colony, which is suffering, and I don't know if it's even going to survive, I hope so, and then A Noise Within, which seems to be doing very well. And my question is, what is the likelihood of there being more theaters that will be able to pay their actors a living wage that are equity contract theaters?
Well, I think the likelihood, quite frankly, from my experience, which does go back to the 70s, is rather low. And I think that there are probably several, maybe many reasons for it. 2 that I would mention is, one is the fact that the 99-seat theater contract exists and is available to virtually everyone. And that whole ecology of actors earning their living, presumably in television and film and radio and commercials, and acting in the 99-seat theaters almost as an avocation, that ecology makes it hard to grow from the 99 to move to, let's say, the Colony level. I think one other issue about that also is the way Los Angeles is constructed around cars. It's really hard to find a location that you can bring 300 people to and provide the amount of parking that is necessary to get a license to run a theater of that size. And I know this because it took us 15 years to find a location when I was at Center Theater Group, 15 years to find a location for our 3rd theater, which became the Kirk Douglas Theater. And most of the problems were we would find good spaces and there was no way to solve the parking problem. So those are 2 impediments that I would put up. I just want to go back to Jeannie's comment too, and I just want to add one thing to the list of things that professionals bring to the table or to the rehearsal room. And it's not just actors, but the directors and the designers, stage managers, and that is they do the work to what we know to be a professional level within a certain time limit. And when it's time for the rehearsal to be over, it's over and everybody goes home. And they don't work 24 hours a day, which is something else that professional actors and directors bring to the table. And I just thought I wanted to add that.
You know, Charles, it's not that they just do the work in that time frame. They can do the work in that time frame.
Exactly.
They're capable of doing the work, and that's what's a big difference. You know, the other thing about the 99-seat theater, talking about impediments to, you know, moving up, is just the math alone. You know, ticket sales, when you have under 100 seats, to make it viable, to pay the cost of the production and pay the staffing and to pay the actors in 99 seats is just, I mean, you really do need more seats. I mean, it's just to make the math work. And then you need more parking to make this, I mean, so it absolutely needs to be where we need to look to the future. But, you know, just some of that simple math is a big impediment.
Theater, and there's a very healthy off-Broadway group of theaters, a lot of them, and we hardly have any.
Well, and in New York, the showcase clause is such a less desirable contract too. I mean, I've never lived and worked in New York, but my understanding is that it's 2 weeks as opposed to we get, I think, 6 to 8, you know, and the amount of seats that they have is a little more, but it might be, I think that the 99-seat plan is just, it's so great, it's so appetizing, it's so easy, it's so tempting to stay there. You know, of course, you know, we wish we could pay everybody well, but if we're doing passion projects, the 99-seat plan makes it really easy to just do that passion project and then move on to the next one.
I have a question. What is the likelihood that America is in the middle of an interesting sea change toward human interaction and away from two-dimensionalization that will add to people getting jobs as actors? Because we used to think, oh, actors are going to go away now because they can do 3D stuff and it's all like technological and blah, blah, blah. And then Les Mis did a musical where they did all the music singing live and they didn't put it in studio, and it was a huge, you all saw that movie. And people, and HD has made it so that it's almost human interaction now when you watch a very, very high quality film. I feel like people are getting more interested in live theater again, and they're trying to get it through film. And
yeah, exactly.
At the same time,
Exactly.
theaters are finding ways to save money by getting technologically advanced and doing cool stuff with projections and saving money on sets and getting more actor focused. And so wouldn't it be interesting if 10 years from now, people pile into the theaters? We have to remember that we are on a continuum which involves people's tastes changing, you know? And what if the technology changes such that people want to come back to theater in larger amounts than we thought that they would? You know what I mean?
And the hope is we'll all be here to greet them.
Yeah.
That's what the hope is. I have a question for you. There's not, you don't think there's some mythology in the idea of actors working all day in the television and film industry and then coming to the theater at night? I mean, so few of the actors that I know anymore. I mean, maybe, you know, 30 years ago. But now it feels like so few have that opportunity to work in film and television. I mean, are you seeing that and thinking about that as a real ecology? It feels to me a little mythical.
No, I think it may be. I think it may be mythical, but I think it was the foundation.
Yes, right.
You know,
right.
You mentioned that you know, you've been around a while, but I've been around longer than you have, and I remember when they created this
Take
code,
out your driver's license.
And I remember Eddie Weston saying to me, "I'm going to do this because actors will, you know, they will sweep the theater in order to play Hamlet." He had this kind of mantra.
Right.
And the New York Office of Equity thought he was absolutely, totally out of his mind. And they fought it, but he pushed it through because he knew these people were working without any protections whatsoever.
Right,
they were doing it. They were joining these clubs, and the people running the clubs were running off with the money. It was a terrible mess. And so he pushed that 99-seat theater, they called it the waiver, I think, first, and he pushed it through, and it changed the whole face of Los Angeles theater. And I do want to make one point in that regard, and that is, I think that you really have to look at Los Angeles theater for that reason, because of this huge ecology of the 99-seat theaters. These statistical models don't work when you compare Los Angeles theater to, in a sense, the rest of the country. I think we are sui generis, and I think New York is sui generis, and then there's the rest of the country. You can compare Houston to Chicago and Chicago to San Diego, but these two, I think, coastal cities are very different from each other, but are also different completely from the rest of the country.
I want to just address the mythology piece, that CCI, the Center for Cultural Innovation, commissioned Ann Markinson to do a report about artists and sort of living wages and their experience in communities. And they called Los Angeles the super city for artists, and that Los Angeles artists were not only involved in their art making, whatever the discipline, but by and large, they also were involved with some sort of nonprofit arts piece. So there was a personal practice, there was a secondary component of being engaged with nonprofit arts, and a third piece of being involved in the community by serving on a board, social service, something like that. There was sort of an interesting makeup compared to the artists of other regions, and I think it speaks specifically to that mythology, that not necessarily are they making their living as being an actor in Hollywood film and television, but perhaps they're the chief marketer for East Asian consumer products for Disney. Right, that there's some full-time career profession, and in addition to that, they're a member of a 99C community. I had two other hands. We've got one here in the second row, and then one here.
Brian, I've been in theater here in LA since 1980, and have seen really the whole ecology of it, and like to see that all these people up here are the ecology. Mr. Dillingham and Mr. McFarland just spoke what I wanted to bring up, but I also want to bring up what is the internet doing? Because as far as equity waiver goes and how that changed professional theater in Los Angeles, we still have artists that come in, and now it used to be that you had to be SAG to get a film contract. Now you can go ahead and do anything you want to on the internet. Same devolution is happening. But also the unions right now, since the unions seem to be pushing the theater ethic here in Los Angeles, the unions don't necessarily let you cross over. An equity waiver or an equity stage has to get permission from SAG if they're going to have their actors in a commercial or they're going to use any other product, because there's not yet been done a blending. So looking forward in managing theater in Los Angeles specifically, to follow up on Mr. McFarland and Mr. Dillingham, how do you see the film industry, the unions, and how it's going to affect theater in Los Angeles?
I'm not quite sure what your question is. You're talking about the film industry or the internet?
I'm talking about everything together starting to blend because of the internet. Well,
one thing that the internet's had a huge effect on almost every aspect, I think, of a lot of what we do. One area that's opened up as a result of not just the internet, but digitization and viralization of video, and that is that equity finally woke up to the fact that replicating on video a part of a performance and putting it on your website and letting it go viral was necessary. First of all, it was happening. It's a little bit like what Eddie Weston knew, that people were working without being paid, so he wanted to get them some protections. But the same thing happened with video, that companies now are able to, within certain limits and within certain protections, to video parts of their productions and put them on their websites and make them available to television stations and other things. And that was a huge battle that took years to win, but it was really the internet and the viralization of video that made that possible. So that's just one example. But I'm not sure. I hope that addresses your question.
I mean, people were doing it.
People were doing it. Yes.
Yeah.
Audience participation, twittering in the audience, talking to each other, using social media during a performance or as part of a performance.
Well, that's part of it too. As I said, digitization and video and the internet and all the social media have had an effect. I mean, we could sit. That's another whole panel discussion, and I would not be one of the panelists on that discussion because. But this lady knows a great deal more about it than I do.
We've got time for one more question. We had a hand up, and we're gonna, if we can capture your questions, we'll make sure we can get to them electronically. So right here in the second row. That was a thoughtful lean back.
Hi, my name is Chill Kong, and actually mine goes to the evolution of theater companies and the community here, because in particular, the majority of the ecosystem here are 99 below and are part of the equity waiver. And it goes to the encouragement of the professionalism and then how we set that standard. Because my biggest problem right now is what is the standard? We keep talking about ethics and codes, but we still have to create a standard that can exist, knowing that it's not going to make everybody happy. So, and I would say within your individual experiences, did you have to establish a kind of standard within your own company? And was it purely just based on unions? Was that?
I can.
That was purely based on like unions and unionization.
I just wanted to comment. I'm a new executive director at the Pasadena Playhouse, relatively new. And of course, you know, I was in the 99 scene. And I feel strongly that I can speak to my goal for our institution about this. We have an opportunity to, again, bring under a sort of an umbrella a wonderful company called the Furious Theater Company to be in residence at the Pasadena Playhouse. Also next season, we are looking at, and I can't tell you what it is, but we may be bringing on a show that started in the 99 scene to our main stage. And I challenge our other big regionals to take on these ideas. You know, the La Jolla Playhouse used to have a great, I think they still do, a resident theater program for young emerging theaters. If we have the resources to get the grants or the donors in an easier fashion than our 99-seat peers, then we should help them to get up off their feet and get their artists paid and get their art seen on a larger level. That's something that matters to me, so I hope to bring ethics that I learned as a 99-seat person into the regional world and help my peers in the regional world to see the value. So that's something that we're doing at the Pasadena Playhouse.
I felt like there was an inhale of breath from Debbie at the beginning of that. Is there still thoughtful?
Well, my question to you is, how, if Furious is there, your question was standards. What were your standards that you would have Furious be there and not, you know, the B theater company? What is it about Furious that you say these guys meet the Pasadena Playhouse criterion of professional?
I guess it's a bit of taste and history. They were there before. But also they are an ensemble who are excellent in what they do, and they complement. They're a complementor of the work already being done on the main stage. So I appreciate that. And they also can blend in a professional way into interesting things we do, like our play development series. They can blend into our institution and sometimes sort of lock in. And I look for that. And in part that's because they're a flexible, you know, 99-seater type organization, but also they have maintained a standard of excellence that we appreciate, that, right, and that we have aesthetically appreciated.
But isn't that's the tough thing to define? What is exactly is excellence? It's like porn. You know, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. You know, I think that is what we're talking about. You know, excellence, right?
I think excellence and standards. And with that, to close, I'm going to toss the question back out to all of you and ask, what standards would you be interested in? What standards do you hold each other to? And please answer on Facebook, Twitter, LA Stage Times. With that, we're at time. Thanks for your time and your attention.
Thank you, Terence.